Welcome to this talk. The big ideas that we're going to be talking about today in this room include an overview of personality theory. And I'll tell you why I chose this topic after I just give you a little run through of what we're going to do today so you have a sense. I pressed record here. And you're, thank you. We're going to look at our cultural obsession with personality tests. We have a very big interest in this topic. And we're then going to look at the evolution, the reliability, and validity of these tests. Are they worth much? Do they really stand up? Are personality tests more than just a fun thing to do in a magazine or online? We will think together about what the Torah might have to say about the development of personality. And then we'll talk about a very current movement that assesses character over personality. So while we're talking, I can really give you some things to think about. What is the difference between character and personality? Are they the same thing? Are they different? And then very finally, but we'll make sure to get there, we will figure out how to use all of this theory and all of these methods in a framework that is called strength-based parenting. Now why? And why is this a big idea? Like many young teens, when I was in high school and maybe early middle school, we didn't have the internet, but there were lots of teeny bopper magazines where you could take a million kinds of personality tests. Are you the creative type, the deep type, the moody type? You could figure out what career you might go into. You could then give this to your friends and figure out what they would do. Pass these tests on to your parents or your siblings, and you'd suddenly have a wealth of information. And it always surprised me that it was so intuitive to my answers on my personality test, we filled out right away. And I look at my friend like, you really think about it? You really got A and B, A versus B? I mean, I can't even imagine living in your shoes. I would never have circled that answer. So right away I had a little bit of an inkling that this wide range of personality in something as simple and as basic as what you might know now to be those Facebook personality tests, if any of you are on those, where these, you do a little test and suddenly it flashes in that you're supposed to be a rocket scientist, or that you'd be, your name means X, Y, or Z. They're all different forms of this culture and the rooting of personality tests. Then when I was 16 in summer camp, a staff member gave me a present. I was her waitress, and she gave me a present. And it was a sefer, a Torah book, by an author named Miriam Adahan. Maybe you've heard of her. And what the sefer was a Torah interpretation of one of the most widely used personality tests. And until recent times, the most empirically valid personality test, called the Myers-Briggs Personality Indicator. And this woman, Miriam Adahan, took this test, had you take it right at the beginning of the book, and the book was called Appreciating People, Including Yourself. And the idea was that you would take your personality test, and then you would be able to apply this, understand yourself, and understand yourself in a Torah framework as well. So amazing. I loved it. I soon learned that my personality type was the personality type that would most like personality tests. When I later discussed it with my parents, my father, very successful real estate lawyer, and not interested in studying emotions, sort of looked at it and was like, oh, okay, that's nice, and he didn't really want to take my test and didn't have much to do with it beyond that idea. But here I am years later still talking about personality. I thought about becoming a medical doctor, I ended up becoming a clinical health psychologist, and I remain rooted in personality work to this day. I think about personality with my students and my clients, and we try to figure out what makes ourselves tick and how to help the relationships that we're in. Why else is personality such a big idea? For one major reason, it's something accessible to all of us. You walk into a room, you meet somebody, and right away for many of us, either because of innate strengths that we're good at understanding personality, or because over time we've learned about personality, we start putting people into boxes. Oh, she's really warm and friendly. I can talk to her. She's that aloof type. I'm nervous about her. That guy over there, he's, really, really just too loud, too gregarious for me. I'm going to stay away. We start doing that ourselves. It's some basic core aspect of psychology that's very accessible. It's something we do. It's something we touch right away when we meet people. When I was so we start doing that, and then that is why I think culture has become an accessible point of psychology understanding. It also matters a lot. If you're hiring for a business, if you're interviewing teachers for a school, if you want to bring on a new office administrator, if you're a growing business and you need that key person to take you to the next level, you really want to know what you're getting. Now, one of the most amazing and sad discoveries about interviews, personal interviews, is that personal interviews for a job, while we must do them, have very little predictive ability in terms of who's going to be successful at that job across almost every field. Fascinating, right? So meaning in an interview, you're getting sort of a little personality taste, and yet that interview alone is not enough to predict who's going to be successful at jobs, at schooling, and lots of other things. Isn't that wild? We've got so much time in interviewing, actually, and we don't really get the results we want from that. So, for practical economic business purposes, the study of personality has a different twist. We really want to invest in this, which the Gallup organization did to a large degree for years, for decades, and they've evolved probably one of the strongest, most used business-based personality tests called the Strengths Finder. You have to pay to use it. An example of where personality comes up in a way that is very practical in the larger world. It also matters in our smaller world in terms of our families, our successful relationships, and that is where I'm going to take our talk today, and we're going to move it away from the business aspect, and possibly even the other root of personality testing was also to understand patients who are not doing well in the mental health sense of the word, and really not well, and is often used in prison systems, or people who really are clinically at a very low place of performance and success, to understand their personalities. We will take it and bring our families and ourselves up a little bit and lift our personality understanding today in all those ways that I outlined. So let's start. What is personality? How do you define personality? If you look at the very basic dictionary definition of personality, if you Google this, actually, you'll be amazed. It seems like all the dictionaries can't get a great grasp on personality. Merriam-Webster dictionary, lots of definitions listed. The best one I found was the complex of characteristics that distinguishes an individual or a nation or group, especially the totality of an individual's behavior and emotional characteristics. Do you have, this is a resource booklet. Is there any extra source sheets coming up here? Thank you. Oh. There's a resource booklet and a source sheet. Here you go. Make sure everyone has, I'll show you the one that has two cartoons on top is a source sheet. Who needs one? And we need another one out here. So again, it's the complex of characteristics that distinguishes an individual or a nation or a group, the totality of an individual's behavioral or emotional characteristics. So it's the totality, the sum of one's behavioral and emotional characteristics. And add on the first part of the definition, it distinguishes that person from a group. Makes that person, or that individual, that nation or group, individual. What are the theories of personality development? We have a number of different types. We have the type, now this begins your source sheet here, I'm just using a different, the theories of personality development under my cartoons there, which just, I always like to give you a laugh to start off, but the first cartoon actually is debatable. Do they develop a personality even before they hit the world? Do they have some inborn traits? And the second part will show how personality theory has evolved through the amazing new decade of positive psychology that we are living in. So what are the theories of personality development? Number one, the oldest theory is that we have a biological type. You're born, no matter what happens to you, it's inborn, you have a personality type, it is very defined, and you will figure out what this type is as you grow up. Another theory that is similar, but takes type and breaks type down into traits. The trait theory of personality. Eysenck, Cottrell, these were people who invested. I mean, Eysenck in particular was so criticized that his theories were too loose or too fluffy in the scientific world to be valid. So he spent his entire lifetime in the lab testing and retesting his personality tests, breaking them down with factor analysis to show that his trait theory of personality could hold up over time and could be valid in any kind of setting. So it's interesting to see that type of thinking about personality. But that you have not a whole global personality, but that you have certain inborn traits. If you think about yourself, you might think this is true. You know, if people told you since you were very small, oh, you were always so giving, you're always so caring, or you were always so creative, or you're always so rambunctious. You were always outgoing from the moment you were born, from that first gurgle in the crib. So this is an idea of a trait type of personality. Then we advance towards Freud and Erikson, the psychodynamic types of personalities. And what happened here in this model is that Freud and Erikson started to look at the unconscious aspects of personality, the interplay with your environment, but not so much in a behavioral, cognitive way, but the unconscious impulses. And Freud, we know, famously developed his psychosexual stages of personality and how we evolve as people. And Erikson took a more psycho-emotional approach to development, and we moved a long time to an actualization of ourselves, but that is rooted in unconscious processes, and not so much an active working on of ourselves, but sort of being hit and impacted by the things that we bump into in life, or that are happening to us. Social behavioral theories of personality development, this moved into the famous Skinner and Watson, that we are thinking and analyzing, we are the sum of our behavioral, social and behavioral interplay with the world, our cognitive thoughts, when we experience a situation, affect then how we perform and the choices we make, and it's a very active forming of personality. We are choosing what works, we are rejecting what doesn't, and we are shaping ourselves along that journey. That's a kind of really giving a sum up of the cognitive processes. And last but not least, very much not least, because humanistic psychology is thought to be the real father of the positive psychology movement that we're going to learn about, is the humanistic free will individual experience part of life. The humanistic psychologist, when I was in graduate school, I loved Carl Rogers, who espoused a sort of philosophy of unconditional positive regard upon yourself and others, and that operating through this lens would be a way to really bring out the best in yourself and in the world around you. And it just resonated with me and my inherent trait, type, or biological or social cognitive personality that I had developed by that point. We could analyze which one it was. But the addition of the humanistic form of psychology that no one else brought in at that point really was the real focus on free will, that we have free will, that we may have a type, trait, or inborn characteristic. We may have been influenced by psychodynamic processes that are unknown to us, certain psychosexual or developmental things that happen to us along the way, but that nonetheless we have free will and the ability to work with those and to tailor our personalities to reject the things that are not working for us or that we're overusing, and to strengthen the things that are strong for us and use that even further. And that was the humanistic theory of personality development, and Maslow extended this concept and said we work on a hierarchy of needs. We have lots of different needs that we need to fill every day. We have physical needs, emotional needs, we have career needs, and we want to actualize the best form of ourselves along this hierarchy of needs. And we top it off with sort of the highest form of ourselves, which is a really empathic, sort of deep, self-understanding person that can understand themselves and others and fulfill their needs to the best of their ability. So these are the theories of personality. Okay, nice. Great theories. Still trying to figure out who I am, who my kids are, why my boss behaves the way he does, why the new employee that I hired is not doing what I thought that they'd be doing, and how can I motivate that person to be a better, more successful member of our team. Enter the world of personality tests. They are very, very fascinating. They are very fun if you like them, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. The most objective tests, the most well-known tests, and the difference between objective versus projective, I'll tell you a little bit about them. An objective test is you are sitting at your desk. I could give you one to do right now. Some of them take 10 minutes, some of them take 5 minutes. You check off certain questions. I'm not biasing your answers. You're just sitting there filling in the answers. And then there's no interpretation that I do. I plug them into a computer program, I score them, and based on different weights and measures, it spits out a personality for you. So it's objective. They are free from rater bias, so I'm not putting my bias upon you. They're thought to have more validity, but they have certain problems that come along with them. If I would give you a personality test right now, Monday morning, January 2nd, are you really in the mood to take one right now? Maybe, if you're in this room, you might be really intrigued to do that. If you have a lot of pressures weighing upon your head, or you had a really tough holiday weekend, it might color potentially some of the answers that you have. I am asking you to be open, honest, and self-reflective if you take a personality test that's objective. A lot relies on you. So we have to really make sure that these tests are repeatable over time. You know, can they really hold up over time? And do they really study and gauge the things that we want them to do? Okay? And that is the challenge of those tests. The projective tests, which are not used so much anymore for, I'll ask my more psychodynamically trained Dr. Knapp if she agrees with this, they're not used so much anymore for treatment or for diagnosing or for, let's say, studying how someone might behave in the workplace. They're more used for information, to give us information. Why? They don't have great reliability or validity. They're a test that you might take. The TAT, the thematic apperception test, is a test where you tell stories about a picture, for example, and then I, using my own reader bias, obviously we need to eliminate that and to use norms, does have some subjective judgment of the clinician involved. Would you say that is the case overall? And they have common flaws and strengths. So what is validity? It's a term I'm using. Anyone here took statistics in college or graduate school? Okay. So validity is asking whether the test is actually measuring the construct it is meant to measure. If we're saying this is a personality test, is it really measuring personality? Reliability, we want to know if over time, if I were to take this test again in 5 years, if the construct I'm measuring is personality. We want to know if I take it again tomorrow or I take it again in a couple months, am I still going to have repeatable results? Or is it going to change a lot, like I said, depending on the weather or your hard holiday weekend or whatever is going on in your life? And recent research has showed, actually the APA, the American Psychological Association, made a whole group to study and to show that various forms of psychological testing are as reliable and as valid as many forms of medical testing. In fact, some cases even more reliable and valid than certain medical tests. But there is a challenge inherent in the wording of any psychology test. There's something called the Forer effect, where this is kind of like your horoscope. I find out your birthday. You're a Pisces, let's say. I show you your horoscope. And you say, wow, this really applies to me. Like, I am all this stuff. This is so accurate. That astrologer, I always knew that they had power. They really do. This really applies to me. And then I show that same horoscope to you, and you're not a Pisces, but because it's written in vague terminology, you also might think, wow, that really applies to me. That completely fits my way of thinking about myself. So when something is written in too fuzzy or too vague a term, Forer was a psychologist who studied this, who would show groups of students two different, self-descriptions that were vague enough that everyone in the whole room thought they applied to them. So that's a challenge when you're wording a personality test. Is it going to be too vague that we're all going to think, oh yeah, that's me? And another challenge with the projective tests that has been fixed to some degree, but the norms of the Rorschach and the TAT were normed on a largely white demographic way back when, which again, right away was a problem when the world became much bigger than that. And those norms were not valid anymore for using across the board as a personality predictor when cultural and race influences were not reflected in those answers.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
So you mean white, you mean the whole white population, only white people?
Way back when, yeah, when the Rorschach was first normed.
Economic.
I don't know all the history, but I know that the norms were not considered reflective of a broad, diverse, who you might meet in a hospital setting or in a public school setting at that time. That has evolved. There's been many people who've studied and renormed, but the initial creation was not done on that population. And so those are all the flaws about different personality tests. Now, I've told you all the flaws. Nonetheless, with good research and good validation and good studies, repeating these tests across populations, broadening the norms, the tests do have amazing information about personality and character that can be very useful in the work setting, in the home setting, and in all kinds of personal use settings. So there are flaws, but they are fixable. And the best of those tests listed, the ones on your list that I started with, the Myers-Briggs is probably the most scientifically studied of the original tests. And the ISANC, because of his devotion and his extreme passion about norming his test and making sure that it was valid, would probably be another that is very, very well used. But two more that we'll talk about towards the end of the session are become the ones that are most popularly and most commonly used today. Before we go further into this newest wave of personality testing, let's dive into our Torah. personality, fixed or fluid? What does the Torah have to say about this? I love thinking about this. As a young person in my year in Israel, I spent an incredible amount of time doing character studies of the Tanakh figures I met in my classroom. I figured these are the models for all of us. What can we learn from them? What can I take from them? What are they all about? And I was fortunate enough to have teachers who really studied in this way and who brought in sources from Kabbalah and other places that really, tapped into this. We have a little taste of this when people name their children, right? There's a lot of people who are saying the name I actually choose is going to have some kind of influence on personality, potentially, or chance to have certain goals or directions in life. And there's different ways to analyze that. But let's look at the Avot, our forefathers, and let's talk about whether the Torah might think, we're going to look at just some text here, some concepts, whether the Torah might think that personality is immutable, unchangeable. Or rather, is it more like a humanistic approach to psychology, to personality, that is changeable over time? We have free will and we can adapt. Micha, my source there, the first source, Micha 7:20, Titain emet liYaakov, chesed la'Avraham, asher nishbata la'avotenu mimei kedem. God gave emet to Yaakov, chesed to Avraham. These are the faith and truth with Jacob. Good, strange translation here, but kindness and loving kindness to Abraham, and this is what was promised from time immemorial. What are the innate characteristics of the Avot? Let's see how many of you know this. Anyone know when we say Avraham Avinu, what characteristics have you been trained or have you learned come to mind? Chesed is one, of course. Someone said something over here? It's the overwhelming characteristic we know about him. That's what we are trained to know about Avraham. Avraham ish chesed. It says here in Micha, he was named that, he was given that. Another Kabbalistic way of looking at Avram is maybe ish ahava. He had a lot of love, which is wrapped into the meaning of chesed. Loving kindness is even an interpretation that you'll standardly often see. And yet, Abraham, let's think about some of the stories. Without looking at text, let's think about some of the stories that we know about Abraham. Was he always so chesed-oriented and kind? I'm trying to think. Let's think, for example, yes, when he was in Mitzrayim, when he had to fight for Sodom. Abraham was choosing to fight for Sodom, to be not destroyed. That's a kindness to the people of Sodom. But what other aspects of his personality were coming up? When you have to fight for something, are you always kind when you fight? Be strong. You have to be a little bit tough. Avram had to take his son in the ultimate test of Avram Avinu, and he had to sacrifice him on the mountain. His kindness for his son was probably the strongest example of a great test for someone who's a man of kindness, to take your most loved possession and listen to the word of God unabashedly and without question, and be prepared to sacrifice him. This takes something else beside kindness, some other kind of perseverance or strength of conviction that one can do to do this kind of thing. So Avram is an ish chesed, but we already see a little bit of a nuance there. And yet we know that most of the stories we have about his graciousness and hosting and his guests and his reaching out to people and bringing people to Hashem revolve around chesed. Then we move to Yitzchak. Yitzchak, anyone know what you associate with Yitzchak? Is a little more of a tricky one to kind of figure out. Strength. Gevura. Strength is what is Kabbalistically associated with Yitzchak, and what is also what we know about in terms of his life. What does strength mean? Strength might be, in some ways, what you might think of as a polar opposite to chesed in a certain way. You can't always be so bothered about thinking about everyone's emotions, what they need. I'm strong, and my convictions are strong. Another word that is used to describe Yitzchak's strength is also pachad, fear, a certain kind of intense fear of God, an intense fear relationship with Hashem and with his world around. There are stories about when Yitzchak met his wife, right? Do you know what happened when Yitzchak met his wife? Do you remember that story? Where she falls off a camel. She's so like fearful of what, in awe of what she saw. And then this is another a little bit of a taste of what we think about Yitzchak. Yitzchak actually was known also for sort of grounding what his father did. He redug the wells, they say, of Abraham. He kind of strengthened the foundations of what his father did. Now, what is Yaakov? What does Micha say Yaakov is his characteristic? And truth. So what does this mean? Yaakov ish emet, he's the man of truth, but isn't he the man who also tricked his father, right? I mean, really, what a funny example to use. His name is Yaakov. Akev, trickery is built into his name. And yet the Torah is saying that he is the man of truth. So what happens here from a personality perspective? What are we seeing? We have in the Kabbalistic framework that there were two polar opposites. We had Avram on one side as the man of chesed. We had Yitzchak on the other side as the man of strength and gevura and pachad. And we had Yaakov, who was affected by both of these influences, trying to synthesize his own personality here. I got a little bit of all of this in me. What do I do with all of this? I'm not exactly one way. On the one hand, I'm straight and I'm truthful. On the other hand, I also know when I need to use trickery to get what I want. What happens with Yaakov? He's one of the avos that actually his name ends up being changed, right? He fights with the angel, and the angel says, "What's your name?" He says, "I'm Yaakov." And by the end of the fight, what does his name get changed to? Israel. Yaakov, and it's interesting, as I was looking up I didn't want to focus on the text of this because I want to get back into personality, but I get caught up in it as I was looking it up to remind myself of all the different pieces of this, because it's very powerful for me as a psychologist and as a human being. I'm going to talk a lot about personality tests and your strengths, but we are humans. We are a synthesis. We are Adam 1 and Adam 2, as Dr. Knack said. We are made up of many layers and many parts, so we are always a blend. Yaakov became the founder of the nation that we, Am Yisrael. He became the founder of what we all stem from today. And he, to my mind, represents that humanistic model, taking all of our strengths, all of our inborn traits and personality types, and battling with them, and struggling with them, and trying to put them all together into a whole, and coming out at the end with what is emet, with what is truth. But that it's not that Yaakov had everything sort of set in stone from when he was born, but rather that he worked hard to synthesize the different aspects of his father and grandfather, his own inborn traits, his own life circumstances that he was faced with, his cognitive behavioral challenges that he had to choose in preparing for battle with his brother. He had to make a lot of choices and fights, and the Torah shows us these. And then says, says Yaakov, you are Am Yisrael. We are learning from you. We all stem from you. And Beit Yaakov, here we go. And the whole story of the nation of Israel proceeds from that. So, what I'm gently suggesting here is that the Torah, yes, does recognize certain inborn personality strengths, but that the Torah is saying, you know what, lahavdil, we are humanistic psychology here. We are a mission of a people. As Raizel said, we're not here to sort of give you an answer. Are you Adam 1, are you Adam 2, which one is right? But no, your entire journey is figuring out what's your personality, how to work with it, how to best utilize it, how to not overuse the parts that aren't helpful, how to not underuse the parts that are your gifts and your ultimate strengths. How do we access all of that personality? How do we then become Raizel, ish emet, isha, how do we say that in proper grammar? But how do we become the man of truth that we strive to want to be? And that's what we're going to do here today. Torah models for working on personality, just to give you a few more to hold on to on the next part of your thing, the next part of your stage. When I was very young, I also was fascinated in the question of, can Torah command emotion? Can Torah command emotion? You can command me to hang a mezuzah on my door and put the right cloth inside, but can you command me to feel a connection when I kiss the mezuzah? Is that even possible? As a psychologist, this became incredibly important to me, because if I'm supposed to work and help people change their emotion, I have to know if it's even possible. If Hashem can command emotion, and Hashem is our God, then I know it is possible to change emotion. So we see many examples where the Torah does command emotion. The Torah says you have to have kavanah for certain tefillot or certain aspects of service, or you're not yotzei in the way that you would be. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You're supposed to love the very simple one. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. Really? I really dislike my neighbor. Every time I see that neighbor, every part of my personality and emotional self wants to run away, screaming. But I have to figure out a way, which is a combination of personality, effort, and different utilization of strengths and resources that a psychologist could help you with, the Torah could help you with, figure out a way to access some form of love for that neighbor. An evolution of this is the Musser Movement. The Musser Movement spent a lot of time taking the Torah from the text and applying it to self-growth. Going back, there's a modern Musser Movement going on right now that is incredibly active, There are Musser Va'adim, people sit and work on a midah for a year or 2 or 3. One personality trait, one character trait, showing that there's a chance and a way to delve and explore and to be able to fix some midot or change them. Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Deos, gives us kind of the famous golden mean Rambam model of how to do this. Between each pair of extremes, bein kol de'ah v'de'ah harichoka, mimena b'katzeh ha'acher, there's one side and the other side. De'ot beinonit zo rechoka mizo, they're very, very separate from one another. And there are some dispositions that are innate. There are some that people have built in. Some individuals that are more predisposed to than other dispositions. And still others are not innate at all. Yaish mehen she'enan la'adam mitchilat briyato. There are some dispositions that are not even part of man at all from when he was created. Elo lamado tameh acherim. Rather, he learned them from others. A great example of when I work with students who really struggle with social skills. And they'll say to me, Dr. Yaish, I don't even know what you're saying. I don't see that emotion at all on a person's face. I have no innate sense of what I'm supposed to do in this situation. How does a child who really struggles with, or an adult who really struggles with social skills learn how to get along in this world when it's not innately wired? You role model and you role play and you see when a person does this with their face, that means they're happy, so I can smile at them. When a person does this with their face, then I see they're nervous and I'll ask them how they're doing. And for some people, it's really training. That's what it is. He learned them from others. Or he said, you know what? I don't really need this trait, but I really admire it. That person, whenever I'm with that person, he makes me feel so great. He asks me what I'm doing with my life. He really inquires. He really listens to me. I'm not great at that, but I want to learn that quality. I want to learn that personality trait of empathy. So I've decided to acquire it. Or he heard from others that it's a good one to have, and he practiced it until it became part of his personality. So Rambam is very much saying personality may have inborn or innate characteristics, but in Hilchos Deos he's saying there's a way to acquire those, there's a way to learn those, there's a way to desire to want those. And then, carrying forth, Rambam adds that there is also the concept of just as God is gracious, you too must be gracious. Just as God is compassionate, you too must be compassionate. God holy, you too holy. And God is slow to anger, abundant to kindness, just and fair. I'm giving you these examples because these are actually very similar to character traits that we are going to learn about soon, that we want to learn how to apply into our lives. In order to demonstrate that these are good and proper ways, and a person is obligated to accustom himself to act according to them, to imitate God according to his ability. So this is a command here. Rambam is saying we are not just, it's a nice thing to do, or not just that you think you might need these to help your family, but actually there are certain objective character traits that we actually may really want to work on, or we have to work on to acquire. So let's just stretch our brains for a moment back from the Tanakh. This class is over at 11:30, I think? Okay, good. We're going to now quickly go into our parenting and our use of character-based psychology. Positive psychology was developed. The birth of it was considered in 1999-ish around, but it was brewing years before. The idea was that you went to graduate school, you spent 90% of your time looking at abnormal psychology. People who were really sick, who were in institutions, who were not functioning well, who were not able to live in the day-to-day. And that's what psychologists studied. All the personality tests I initially mentioned were normed on clinically non-well populations. That's where they came from. Said Martin Seligman, said Christopher Peterson, and others like them, wait a second, why aren't we looking at people who are doing really well? People who are functioning and using their strengths and their good character traits and their healthy psychological mechanisms. Let's study those people. And there's been a wave, and it's very fascinating, and it's fun because it's also positive, and it's joyous, but there's been a wave in psychology moving towards looking at adaptive functioning versus maladaptive functioning. And that's where that came from. How did this influence our little world of personality tests? Similarly, we had to norm them on healthy clinical populations, not just on non-well populations. But we also was a shift. Martin Seligman, the father of personality psychology, and Donald Clifton, the father of strength-based psychology, who is considered sort of the grandfather of this movement, they said we need to look at character traits that are adaptive, that are helpful, that are strong, that are good, much like the list Rambam just gave us before. And we want to study and show people what are their strengths? What are their positive traits? We're claiming in positive psychology that working on negatives is not as effective as working on positives. Let's help people find their strengths and let's help people work from them. And there's tons of research about this. You might say to me, Dr. Yaish, this doesn't make sense. We do really have negative things about ourselves. We have to address them. True. Think about it. When you dwell on how much weight you need to lose or how much exercise you need to do over and over again on the lacking, for example, that you have, research doesn't always show that that leads to the best behavior change, just thinking about how bad you are that you're not doing them or how weak you are that you're not doing them. But if you tap your creative strength, for example, me, I just recently took one of these tests again to see if it was repeatable over time, and one of my strongest strengths that comes out is an appreciation for beauty and the wonders of the world. I just like beautiful music and stories, and I walk outside and my kids know that I'm going to be like, oh, look at that gorgeous raindrop on the tree. Just, I don't know, I didn't plan it, that's just what I like to do. Maybe if I would work instead on sort of making my exercise routine more beautiful or more wondrous, perhaps I would have better stick-to-itiveness, because perseverance is not one of my stronger character strengths. But that's the sort of little taste of how this works. So what happened? The tests evolved, and 2 personality tests emerged from the muck. And one is called the VIA Character Strength Survey, which is free to take because it is considered a research tool. In your resource booklet, you will see these tools. You can take it. It takes about 15 minutes. If you're a fast test taker, it may take you even longer. It's actually even evolved to help it's normed for all kinds of populations. If you have a physical disability or a cognitive disability, there's different versions you can check. There's a version you can give your children if you're interested and see what they come out with. And this measures 24 character strengths. If you look at the back page of your thicker resource booklet, the very last page, you'll see, I'll jump to it, there is a very beautiful grid showing the 24 character strengths that evolved from the VIA test. The Clifton Strengths Finder, which is the other test you have to pay to take, is not accessible to you right away, is the leading personality test used in careers nowadays. It also looks at a character model, character traits that are helpful, that are good, that are strong, that are true, that can be used to bring out the best in you and your employees. Now, the VIA has the 24 strengths. You get, when you take your test, it'll give you your 5 top strengths, and that is where you work. You work from your 5 top strengths. Parenting from a character strengths perspective, how do we take this VIA character parenting survey and the idea of character building and use it with our children and our families? Chanoch l'na'ar al pi darko, famous saying from Mishlei, train a lad in the way he ought to go, and then he will not swerve from it, even in old age. Ki askin lo yasur mimenu, he will stay true and to his path. Because every child is different, and when you give your children this survey, if they're willing to take it, you'll see it's fascinating what they rate themselves and what they rate themselves, and where their strengths emerge. If you know your own strengths and you know your child's strengths, you are operating from a positive platform, and operating from strengths that we just said seems to indicate greater, faster behavior success and change than operating from a constant repairing of your weaknesses. In the VIA model, you are not necessarily, all the strengths are all positive. Unlike some of the personality tests that were before, where there were negative things you would find out about yourself, when you take the VIA survey, all 24 are positive things. You just want to figure out which ones are the ones you have the most and enhance those. A deeper level of using a character personality test is saying, there are risks. Maybe I'm overusing some of those to a point that's not appealing to either my colleagues, my children, my husband. I have to figure out how to tame down the ones that are natural to me and use them best. An example of what character parenting can look like, the Gallup, this is a little not intuitive because it's interesting just from how it evolved. Strength-based parenting is all the rage now. What it means, you now know, you are knowledgeable experts on this, that strength-based parenting is parenting from a knowledge of your strengths and your child's strengths. And you're operating in positive words, and a lot of it is language. If your kid knows the word valor, for example, a teenager, a child, and they know that valor is one of their strengths, for example, they can picture themselves that way, and they can notice when a friend is operating from a position of valor and be proud of them, almost amazed by them, and it encourages a cycle of good training. But the strengths-based model came out of the Gallup poll, the Clifton Finder, which I'm telling you is really used more for the workplace. So it's funny. It came out of that study, but the VIA character survey, which is accessible to all of you, is really what people actually use in their parenting practices and their work. What does VIA character parenting look like? Slova Youngrice, Rebbetzin Youngrice's daughter, Slova Youngrice Wolf, who is known to be a speaker about parenting, Torah topics. Just I saw this little tidbit that came up about her, and I realized that I don't know whether she knows she's doing it, but this is an example of, a little extreme example of how one would talk about parenting. This is the last source on your page. Teach your child that he's a real mission in this world. Applaud his mitzvahs. Shout hooray each time he is able to overcome selfishness. Clap for each small kindness. Cheer each seedling of honesty that he plants. Give him a standing ovation for courage. Watch him grow and realize his ability to bring light into our universe. That is a very, very quick sum up of how character parenting looks. There are parenting groups and people who hang up a mosaic of their child's strengths on the wall. For example, I know teenagers who actually keep this in their wallet, their list of their 5 strengths that they know that they can operate from because those are intuitive to them. And if you're having a mosaic in your child's room, a younger child might like that, and you say, tell me, how did you utilize your perseverance today? In workstations today, it was so hard, I wanted to give up. It's so hard for me to read those letters. But I persevered and I got my punch card to show that I was able to do this even though I saw my friends were finishing 5 minutes before me. Wow, that's because you've got a great strength of perseverance, my young child, and that's going to take you far. That's amazing. It's not negating what we know is hard for our child.
Session 1 of the Day of Big Ideas should wrap up in 2 minutes. Session 2 will begin at 11:45.
It's not negating what is hard for my child, but it is taking the strengths to bring them forward. An example of a teenage youth, because that's what I work with the most here at Maya Note, and maybe some of you came to this program because you also have children here or have children in the older side of things, although it's applicable anywhere. If you have a teenager who comes home and is incredibly moody or down, or just snapping at you for everything you say, your tendency might be to say, gosh, what is wrong with this person? I'm saying everything right. Everything is, not landing the way I need it to be. If you're going to take a strengths-based approach to that situation, let's say, for example, for me, one of my stronger qualities is an empathy approach, an ability to kind of really get into that person's head. I'll say, wow, must be something I'm saying that is really hitting my daughter the wrong way or my son the wrong way. Let me figure out what that feels like for them to be doing that. I'm not saying she has to change her moodiness and become less moody. That would be a sort of negative way to look at it, or a non-positive psychology or a non-strengths-based approach to look at it. And then when I have that empathy and I'm working on my strength, I can then tap into her strength. Well, she's really got a great sense of humor when she's not looking like that. So if I can figure out how to tap into humor, it's a little harder with a teenager. With a child, thinks I'm really incredibly funny when I say, enough with the rough, which is something that I do for some reason when he's being very, very rambunctious. I say, enough with the rough, and he thinks it's funny, and it can break into his moment of being too aggressive, and he can hear me because I'm being funny or making a funny face. The teenager, enough with the rough, isn't going to fly so much. But using my humor strength, my empathy, I can pull her out of that mood faster than I could if I was just saying, you've really got to fix that attitude of moodiness, because it's every night when I come home you're like that. It's just not fair to the rest of the family. It's ridiculous, which is how we sound a lot. But when we change ourselves and try to use strengths, we can go really far. Because I knew I couldn't give you all the tools, I gave you a booklet. For those of you who love to read or have a day of big ideas, if those brains want to come out and hear this on a Monday vacation day, the booklet includes a tremendous amount of resources. The Myers-Briggs Personality Indicator, which is still my favorite, even though it's passed from favor. It gives you a list of all the different kinds of parents you could be from that typology. Read them. See which one pulls to you. And then decide if you can use some of those strengths in that description to help you parent better or understand yourself better. There's a list of positive parenting strengths in there from a strengths-based provider that I loved. An exhaustive list of different parenting strengths that you can use in your parenting. And if your children are now off in the world, you can use in your long-distance parenting or in your immediate relationships in terms of what you can do with your friend and your peers to know how to bring out strengths. And then I think the last couple pages are some hands-on examples of how to use strengths-based parenting with younger and middle-type age children. And I give everyone a bracha here that they take these big ideas, personality, which is at the same time so accessible and yet also so important and so deep and so meaningful in the world, that we're able to utilize them and have a strengths-based year full of good ideas and knowledge and practical hands-on use of those. Thank you. Questions or comments? I'm here for now or anyone else.
I really get why this is so powerful to know what's getting what point does that start, like limiting a child in terms of like he has this idea, like what about like, and we also want the child to feel like I'm not boxed in at this point in my life, like I can be, I can develop other strengths. So like I always wonder with like labeling, how much is that like for limiting people in terms of like other things that they could be.
If you want to really be a real practitioner, so they would say to you, I think your strengths are like you have no areas in the bottom 6 to 10. Meaning, can you not be any of those things? Totally not. They're all part of your practice. They're just for the lower strength. You can activate those. You can bring those in there. This is not saying you're only going to be 5, because I think that happens. Like me, I was a dramatic kid, I'm more science. What happens when there's clients and I have to like sign up for this? What happens for your own beliefs? You underutilize that strength. It's not as easy as it is before. But you know what? That's also a real strength. You're not going to be helping your day-to-day life. How do you bring it in? It's much harder than bringing in more part of them. That's how I would see it. And then Chris Peterson was kind of talking psychology, and this great story with a friend of his colleague in the founding psychology movement at the beginning of the and he was like, why are you talking about my weakness? Like, I'm so great at this. He's like, what do you want to be, a psychologist or a friend? Like, you need to also, it's not as great and strong of a talent for him to be stick to it. And like I said, I tell the story to school later, and I realized that was an aspect of myself that I had to also work at. But it's about semantics. Chris Peterson realized that I'm really about to it's really not something I want to do strengths.
I wonder about, and also about, I think about the age a little bit, like, and talk about like from a young age, if these are my strengths, like I would imagine it would be harder than to, I think it's a little different with like a teenager, but I would imagine it would be like a little harder to say like, okay, I have like these other strengths that I haven't seen yet, because I don't,
So we tap onto those 5. My mother told me since I was 5 years old, and my strength was like, it's a good question. I think it was wise parents. And I'm thinking that's all trying to myself. I'm really going to do this accomplishment. Really, if I stay there, I do start to yeah. So either you need to use your strength in a different way, which is another use your strength in a way you didn't have to use it before. It opens up. But you don't really have to go to the bottom strengths, but be careful not to
I never heard the approach of talking to somebody about their strengths. We've seen these kind of sometimes in the workplace, we do this all the time. So you actually get to understand what your own strengths are and to understand the strength of the strengths, so to speak. But I never thought of doing it with my children, like to point out.
It's a great point. So what is characteristics in school?
She just show up.
What are your good and how do you build them? And they ask them how do you look? I could use that a little bit, or I wonder, now I know why you do that. It kind of changes her flat sort of right. It's like to, it's interesting. I think it's new. It's everything new. It's new and old. Oh, good. I like that. Psychology is like a new framework, a new word, or a new way of understanding. But it's producing great success. If you read about psychologists working on this model, read about this out there.
A lot of
Oh, really?
This is so smart.
You're not allowed to have, you know, bring home 99 and above. You know, it's not, we kind of try to figure out why are you doing 99 it's so innate to us, you know, and how do I do this?
I have an 11-year-old.
Should we walk outside? Let's walk outside, I think, because I think this.
She's doing really well, thank God.